environment and human environment. This is the first conference that took place. This was in Stockholm, Sweden. And this conference actually spearheaded a lot of different efforts from all nations that were involved, over 100 nations that came, and created the United Nations Environment Program. So the United Nations Environment Program is the main UN agency that monitors and evaluates and essentially tries to protect the environment. You may not know, but actually, so then we move on to, this is a series of conferences. So 1992 is the second in the series. It took place in Rio. I'm not sure if you were all born then, but in 1992, the Rio, which is famously called the Earth Summit, was a very, very important conference. Right? I'm going to talk about that. I want to show you a small video clip from that conference as well. So at that conference, there were 172 governments that participated, right, out of about 180, so almost the whole world was there. 108 sent their head of states. There were 2,400 representatives from NGOs there, with 17,000 people from parallel NGOs. So there's actually two conferences going on simultaneously, right, which is quite common in these type of events. So at that conference, again, this is the 92 Rio conference, a lot of issues were addressed, including the production of toxic components, including lead in gasoline, right? So lead actually was in gasoline in Kuwait until just a few years ago. So this is an ongoing discussion over decades. Poisonous waste, including radioactive chemicals, and also looking at alternative sources of energy. So already there was a certain awareness, a consciousness that oil and coal and natural gas were not going to be sufficient for future supplies of energy. And they start talking about wind and solar and other possibilities, right? There also was a discussion about trying to build up public transportation systems, right? So trying to rely more on buses and metro systems rather than individual cars to reduce smog and air pollution. Also, there was a budding discussion about water and how water resources actually are depleted, and so we need to start figuring out ways to conserve, protect, and use water more soundly. And I think one of the most important things that came out of this conference, besides these issues I just mentioned, was the Climate Change Convention, which of course later turned into the Kyoto Protocol. And I think this is one of the most important IR environmental issues, of course, is climate change, right? So it's affecting everyone. We'll see a graph later on that shows that natural disasters are just exponentially increasing. And the response to those, you know, is, as we've seen the tsunamis and some of these other events in South Asia have been just detrimental, right, to human health and also to the environment. So I'm not going to get into all the history because of time, but basically I wanted to mention there are the three most important environmental disasters are in this order. Number one, Chernobyl, right, the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine, which took place in 1986. It was essentially an explosion that took place inside the power plant where radioactive materials, particularly cesium, was released into the environment and essentially caused massive amount of radiation to be released. And it wasn't released just over Ukraine, it was actually released all over parts of Asia, Europe, and even parts down to the south of the States. So to this day, to give you an example, in Scotland, there are culls of sheep because certain sheep growing in the highlands of Scotland have been exposed to cesium, which is in the grass, right? And the cesium has half-life. Half-life means it's decomposing essentially in terms of radioactivity. But it will continue to be radioactive for decades, not hundreds and hundreds of years, okay, depending on the exposure. So there are sheep that have to be basically quarantined and slaughtered just because they're radioactive in Scotland to this day. There also were exposures of cesium in Kuwait from Chernobyl. Very, very small, right? But this, we live in a global world, and so when you have this type of pollution, it's not going to stop at a border, right? It keeps going. The second event, of course, was the Bhopal explosion that took place in India in 1984, where at least 20,000 people were either seriously injured or died from the explosion, and that's an ongoing issue because actually there are lawsuits pending against Dow and United Carbide at that time. and there's a certain threat for a boycott from India to the Olympics this year in London because of that issue, right? So this still affects Indians to this day. It's still a very sensitive issue to India to this day. And of course, the third most significant environmental disaster was the oil fires here in Kuwait in 1991. So this was one of the largest exposures of hydrocarbon burning in the world. The actual amount of hydrocarbons was in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons. And the actual exposures were recorded as far away as the Himalayas, right? And also, again, towards the States. So they didn't just stop in the Gulf region. The fires that Saddam Hussein set upon your country actually went very, very far, right? And caused a lot of environmental damage. Now, I put Fukushima here. We don't know the total fallout from Fukushima. I say fallout kind of literally and figuratively because there was a lot of radioactive material that actually came from Fukushima, both into the air and also in the water that was released, because there was a lot of water that was essentially used to try to put out the fires that were there in plants 4 and 1. Now, it's my understanding, reading through the different reports, that some of this radioactive material has actually reached the United States, according to the EPA, and will continue to be transported there through the ocean currents. So these, again, are issues that are really international in scope. Okay, in the book it discusses a little bit about, I want to show you the video, sorry. So we're going to go back and show you this video of the Rio conference, because I think this is really important for you to see. This is Severin Suzuki. Now, Severin Suzuki, you might recognize her last name, is a daughter of David Suzuki, who's a very famous Canadian geneticist and environmentalist. She was speaking at the conference as a member of an NGO. So she's 12 years old here, right? This is 20 years ago. She's 12 years old. She started her own NGO in Canada, Vancouver, to promote environmental issues among youth, right? So it's called Environmental Children's Organization, ECHO. And she and her, at that time, I guess you could say friends, colleagues, raised enough money to actually attend the conference in Rio. Again, there were over 20,000 people there, so it's a very big conference. And this conference will take place again this year, by the way. It's Rio plus 20 this year. And like I was saying, you're going to have an exercise in the class where you essentially participate in Rio plus 20. So I'm going to show you this quick video. We're not going to watch the whole thing in the interest of time, but I wanted to show you a little bit about what, this was a very important speech, and also to show you someone who's basically one of your peers, which is younger than you, but what you can do as young people in your own country, right?
Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. Vanessa Suddy, Morgan Geisler, Michelle Quigg, and me. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to go out in the sun now because of the holes in our ozone. I'm afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. I used to go fishing in Vancouver, my home, with my dad, until just a few years ago we found the fish full of cancers. And now we hear of animals and plants going extinct, every day vanishing forever. In my life, I have dreamt of seeing the great herds of wild animals, jungles and rainforests full of birds and butterflies. But now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see. Did you have to worry of these things when you were my age? All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up in a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. Here, you may be delegates of your government, business people, organizers, reporters, or politicians, but really, your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, and all of you are someone's child. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all part of a family, 5 billion strong. In fact, 30 million species strong.
Now seven
And borders and government will never change that. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. In my country, we make so much waste. We buy and throw away, buy and throw away, buy and throw away, and yet northern countries will not share with the needy. Even when we have more than enough, we are afraid to share. We are afraid to let go of some of our wealth. In Canada, we live the privileged life, with plenty of food, water, and shelter. We have watches, bicycles, computers, and television sets. The list could go on for 2 days. 2 days ago, here in Brazil, we were shocked when we spent time with some children living on the streets. This is what one child told us. I wish I was rich. And if I were, I would give all the street children food, clothes, medicines, shelter, and love and affection. If a child on the streets who has nothing is willing to share, why are we who have everything still so greedy? I can't stop thinking that these are children my own age, that it makes a tremendous difference where you are born. That I could be one of those children living in the favelas of Rio. I could be a child starving in Somalia, or a victim of war in the Middle East, or a beggar in India. I am only a child, yet I know if all the money spent on war was spent on finding environmental answers, ending poverty, and finding treaties, what a wonderful place this earth would be. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world. You teach us to not to fight with others, to work things out, to respect others, to clean up our mess, not to hurt other creatures, to share, not be greedy. Then why do you go out and do the things you tell us not to do? Do not forget why you are attending these conferences, who you're doing this for. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world. And we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. Are we even on your list of priorities? My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.
Charles, what's she doing now? Charles, what's she doing now?
She's actually a biologist working in Canada, in BC. So she's a conservationist like her father, basically.
Very mature for 12.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, this is, I mean, can you imagine the courage it takes to speak before, I mean, there wasn't 20,000 people in the audience at that point, but there was at least a few hundred, right? So, to get to give a speech like that with very few, it was very strong, very few errors, and just very